Have you ever walked past someone on the street and didn't give them a second thought? What if I told you that one moment of kindness could completely change your life? What if that person sitting on the cold pavement wasn't who they appeared to be? Today's story is about Sarah, a struggling single mother who stopped to help a stranger, not knowing he was worth billions of dollars. And when his security guard suddenly arrived, everything she thought she knew about life was turned upside down. Stay with me until the very end because what happens next will make you believe in the power of compassion again. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you believe kindness still matters in this world. And subscribe so you never miss stories that restore your faith in humanity. Before we continue, please tell us where you're watching us from. We love seeing the reach of our stories. Sarah's alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, just like it did every single day. But this wasn't the sound of a new beginning. This was the sound of survival. She dragged herself out of bed, her body aching from yesterday's shifts, and looked over at her 7-year-old daughter Lily, sleeping peacefully in the bed they shared. Their apartment was tiny, barely enough room for the two of them, but it was all Sarah could afford. She was a single mother working 3 jobs, and no matter how hard she pushed herself, the math never worked out. There was always more month than money, always another bill she couldn't quite pay, always that gnawing fear in the back of her mind that one emergency, just one unexpected expense, could send them spiraling into homelessness. As Sarah moved quietly through the apartment, making Lily's lunch for school, she counted what was left in the refrigerator. Half a jar of peanut butter, 2 slices of bread, an apple that had a bruise she'd need to cut around, and 1 juice box she'd been saving. She made the sandwich carefully, as if it were something precious, because to them, it was. Every meal mattered. Every dollar counted. She kissed Lily's forehead before leaving for her first job at the diner, whispering a promise she made every morning. "It's going to get better, baby. Mama's going to make sure of it." But some mornings, Sarah wasn't sure she believed her own words anymore. The rain started before she even reached the bus stop. Cold, relentless rain that seemed to seep through her thin coat and settle into her bones. The bus was late, which meant she'd be late, which meant her boss would give her that look, that disappointed shake of his head that made her feel about 2 inches tall. Sarah ran the last 3 blocks to the diner, arriving breathless and soaking wet, her shoes squelching with every step. She changed into her uniform in the tiny bathroom, trying not to look at herself in the mirror because she knew what she'd see. Dark circles under her eyes. Worry lines that hadn't been there a year ago. The face of someone who was slowly being ground down by life. The morning shift at the diner was brutal. It always was. Customers who snapped their fingers at her like she was invisible. Complaints about coffee that wasn't hot enough, eggs that weren't cooked right, service that wasn't fast enough. Sarah smiled through all of it, her feet screaming in shoes that should have been replaced 6 months ago, her back aching from carrying heavy trays. When someone left her a $2 tip on a $40 check, she said thank you like they'd given her $100. Because $2 was $2. $2 was a juice box for Lily. $2 was hope, even if it was small. When her shift finally ended at 1 o'clock, Sarah counted her tips. $37. Not great, but not terrible either. She had 2 hours before her next job cleaning offices downtown, just enough time to grab something to eat and maybe sit down for 20 minutes. She bought a sandwich from the corner store, the cheapest one they had, and a bottle of water. As she walked toward a small park, where she sometimes took her break, trying to enjoy these few precious moments of rest, that's when she saw him. A man was slumped against a brick wall on the sidewalk, his head hanging down, his clothes dirty and worn. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. People walked past him without stopping. Some looked at him with disgust, some with pity. Most didn't look at him at all, as if he were just part of the urban landscape, as invisible as the fire hydrant next to him or the trash can on the corner. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. She knew that feeling. She knew what it was like to be invisible, to feel like the world had decided you didn't matter. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, something she'd said 1,000 times when Sarah was growing up. "Baby girl, we don't have much, but we always have enough to share. Compassion costs nothing, but it's worth everything." Sarah walked over to him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me, sir? Are you okay?" Her voice was soft, genuinely concerned. The man looked up, and Sarah was surprised by what she saw. His eyes were clear and intelligent, not clouded by alcohol or drugs like she might have expected. He looked to be in his early 50s, with graying hair and a face that showed both hardship and something else she couldn't quite name. Dignity, maybe. Or strength. "I'm all right, miss," he said quietly. But his voice was weak, and Sarah could see his hands trembling slightly. Just having a rough day. Sarah didn't believe him. She'd told that same lie too many times herself. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. And when he didn't answer right away, she knew. She looked down at the sandwich in her bag, the sandwich she'd bought with money she could barely spare, the sandwich that was supposed to be her only meal until dinner. Then she looked at this man, this stranger, this human being who was suffering right in front of her. And really there was no choice at all. She sat down on the cold, wet pavement next to him, ignoring the dampness seeping through her pants, and pulled out her sandwich and water. "Here," she said, offering them to him. "Please, take these." The man stared at the food like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I can't take your lunch," he protested, and there was something in his voice, an emotion Sarah couldn't quite identify. "You need it yourself." Sarah smiled, and even though she was exhausted and worried and scared about her own future, it was a real smile, warm and genuine. "I'll be okay," she lied. "I can grab something later. You look like you need this more than I do right now." She pressed the sandwich and water into his hands, and after a moment of hesitation, he accepted them with a gratitude that seemed almost overwhelming. They sat together in silence while he ate, and Sarah found herself curious about his story. How does someone end up here? What circumstances led to this moment? She knew better than most how thin the line was between making it and not making it. She was one car breakdown, one missed paycheck, one sick child away from being in his exact position. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The man paused, as if considering whether to tell the truth, and then said, "Michael. My name is Michael." Sarah extended her hand. "I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you, Michael." They talked for a while, and Sarah was struck by how articulate and kind Michael was. He asked about her life, and unlike most people who ask that question without really wanting an answer, he actually listened. She found herself telling him about Lily, about working 3 jobs, about the constant fear and exhaustion that had become her normal. Michael listened with an attention that felt rare and valuable. He didn't offer empty platitudes or unsolicited advice. He just listened, and sometimes that's the greatest gift one person can give another. There was something different about him, Sarah thought. Something that didn't quite match his appearance. The way he spoke, the way he listened, the intelligence in his eyes. It was like looking at a puzzle where the pieces didn't quite fit together. Sarah glanced at her phone and felt a spike of panic. She was going to be late for her cleaning job. "I'm so sorry, I have to go," she said, scrambling to her feet. Michael stood too, steadier now after eating and drinking. He looked at her with an intensity that made Sarah pause. "Thank you," he said, and there was a weight to those words that felt like more than just gratitude for a sandwich. "You have no idea what you've done for me today. You saw me. You treated me like a human being. That matters more than you know." Sarah squeezed his hand briefly, feeling the calluses there, evidence of a life she knew nothing about. "Take care of yourself, Michael. I hope things get better for you." And then she was hurrying away, already mentally calculating how late she'd be and whether her supervisor would dock her pay. Sarah had made it maybe half a block when she heard the screech of tires behind her. Her heart jumped into her throat. That sound, sudden and alarming, made her turn around instinctively. What she saw made her stop dead in her tracks, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. 3 black SUVs, the kind with tinted windows and an unmistakable air of importance, had come to an abrupt stop right where she'd been sitting with Michael moments before. The doors flew open with synchronized precision, and men in dark suits emerged, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of military training and serious purpose. Sarah stood frozen, watching this scene unfold like something from a movie. Were they police? Was Michael in some kind of trouble? Had she just helped a criminal? Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more alarming than the last. But these weren't police officers. The suits were too expensive, the coordination too precise, the overall presence too corporate. These were private security, and they surrounded Michael with a level of protection usually reserved for presidents and celebrities. One guard immediately produced an umbrella, shielding Michael from the rain that was still falling. Another held out what looked like a phone and wallet. A third spoke rapidly into an earpiece while scanning the area with alert, professional eyes that missed nothing. And Michael, the man she'd just given her lunch to, the man who'd been slumped against a wall looking defeated and forgotten, transformed before her eyes. He stood straighter, his entire demeanor changing. His voice, when he spoke to his security team, was authoritative and commanding. This was not a man who was lost or broken. This was someone used to power, to respect, to being in control. Sarah felt dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. What was happening? Who was this person she'd just shared her food with? Nothing made sense. The world had tilted sideways, and she couldn't get her bearings. One of the security guards spotted Sarah standing there, clearly connected to their principal by proximity and timing. He said something to Michael, who immediately looked in her direction. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the recognition in his eyes, and something else. Warmth, gratitude, respect. Michael said something to his team, and then, to Sarah's absolute shock and confusion, he started walking toward her, flanked by 2 guards who moved with him like shadows. Every instinct Sarah had screamed at her to run. This was too much, too surreal, too impossible. But her feet wouldn't move. She was paralyzed by confusion and disbelief, and a growing sense that her entire understanding of the last hour was completely wrong. Within seconds, Michael was standing in front of her again, but he looked completely different. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by confidence and authority. The clothes were still worn and dirty, but somehow they didn't match the man wearing them anymore. It was like a mask had fallen away, revealing someone entirely different underneath. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was warm despite the bizarre circumstances. "I owe you an explanation." One of the guards stepped forward, his voice professional but firm. "Sir, we should get you to the vehicle immediately. You need medical attention, dry clothes, and we have 17 missed calls from the board." Michael held up a hand, a simple gesture that somehow commanded absolute obedience. "In a moment. This woman saved my life today, and she deserves to understand what just happened." He turned back to Sarah, who was staring at him with a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning comprehension. "My full name is Michael Thornton. I'm the CEO of Thornton Industries. You might have heard of us." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Thornton Industries. Of course she'd heard of them. Everyone had heard of them. They were one of the largest technology companies in the world, worth billions of dollars. Michael Thornton wasn't just rich. He was Forbes list rich, private jet rich, could buy a small country rich. And she'd just given him half her sandwich. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She put a hand against the wall to steady herself, her mind reeling. "I don't understand," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why were you... How did you... I mean..." She couldn't even form a complete sentence. Nothing about this made sense. Why would a billionaire be sitting on a street corner dressed like he was homeless? Why would he accept food from a struggling single mother? What kind of bizarre social experiment was this? Michael's expression became somber, almost vulnerable again, despite the guards and SUVs and obvious wealth surrounding him. "I was testing something," he said. "Testing people, really. Testing the world. Testing myself." He explained that he'd been feeling disconnected from reality, surrounded by people who only saw his money and power, people who told him what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to hear. He'd started to wonder if genuine compassion still existed in the world, if anyone would help a stranger who appeared to have nothing to offer in return. So he'd done something his security team and lawyers had strongly advised against. He'd dismissed his guards for a few hours, changed into old clothes from a thrift store, and walked the streets of the city where his company headquarters stood, just to see what would happen. "For 3 hours, hundreds of people passed me by," Michael said, and Sarah could hear the emotion in his voice. "Some looked at me with disgust, some with pity, some with fear. But everyone kept walking, everyone except you." Sarah felt a surge of anger cutting through her confusion. "So this was all an experiment? I was part of some rich person's social study?" There was an edge to her voice now, the defensive walls going up. She'd been manipulated, used, turned into data for some billionaire's curiosity about how the other half lived. Michael immediately shook his head. "No, you don't understand. What you did wasn't part of an experiment for me to observe. It was real. Your kindness was real. And it reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all my years of building an empire and accumulating wealth. It reminded me what actually matters in life." He took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You were going to be late for work because you stopped to help me. You gave me food that you needed for yourself. You sat with me on cold, wet pavement and treated me like I mattered, like I was a human being worthy of dignity and respect. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people in your exact situation would have walked past without a second glance?" Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her was still angry, still felt manipulated, but another part of her recognized the genuine emotion in his words. He wasn't mocking her or patronizing her. He was being honest about something that clearly affected him deeply. The security guard approached again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Thornton, please. We've been searching for you for over an hour. The board has been calling continuously. Your Your family is worried sick. We really need to get you secured. Michael nodded, but didn't move yet. Sarah, I want to help you. I want to repay your kindness. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. This was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. I don't want repayment, she said quietly. I didn't help you because I expected something in return. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because you needed help, and I had something to give. That's it. Michael smiled at that. A genuine smile that transformed his entire face. I know. That's exactly why I want to help you. Because you didn't do it for reward or recognition. You did it because of who you are. Because of your character. And that kind of character deserves to be supported. Not to struggle endlessly just to survive. He pulled out a business card from one of his guards and wrote something on the back of it with a pen that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. He handed it to her, and Sarah took it with trembling fingers. This is my direct number. I'm serious about wanting to help. Please, let me make your life a little easier. Sarah looked at the card in her hand, feeling the expensive weight of it, seeing the gold embossing that probably cost more than her entire outfit. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Billionaires didn't sit on street corners and then offer to help the people who gave them sandwiches. This was fantasy, something from a movie or a feel-good news story, not something that happened in actual life. I need time to think about this, she said, her voice shaking. I need to understand what's happening because none of this makes sense to me. Michael respected that. He asked for her contact information, and Sarah reluctantly provided it, still half convinced this was all some elaborate dream, and she'd wake up back in her tiny apartment with Lily, still struggling, still exhausted, still afraid. As Michael was finally ushered into one of the SUVs, he rolled down the window one last time. Sarah, I mean every word I said. You changed something in me today. You reminded me why I started my company in the first place, before the money and power complicated everything. You reminded me about basic human connection and compassion. Thank you. And then they were gone, the SUVs disappearing into traffic with the smooth efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation, leaving Sarah standing alone on the sidewalk in the rain, soaking wet, holding a business card, and wondering if she'd completely lost her mind. Let me ask you something right now. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return? Drop a comment below and tell me about it. I want to hear your stories because moments like these remind us what really matters in life. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and disbelief. Sarah kept the business card but didn't call. She told herself it had been a weird encounter. Nothing more. Probably nothing would come of it anyway. She went back to her 3 jobs, back to the endless cycle of work and worry and exhaustion. But she couldn't stop thinking about Michael, about those intense eyes and that moment when everything changed. She researched Thornton Industries online during her break at the convenience store, scrolling through article after article about Michael Thornton. Self-made billionaire who'd built his company from nothing. Philanthropist who'd donated millions to various causes. Innovator who'd revolutionized 3 different industries. The photos showed a polished, powerful man in expensive suits, shaking hands with presidents and celebrities, accepting awards, giving speeches. He looked nothing like the vulnerable man she'd met on the street. Then, 4 days after their encounter, Sarah's phone rang while she was cleaning an office building, on her hands and knees scrubbing a bathroom floor. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Sarah, this is Michael Thornton. I hope I'm not disturbing you. His voice was warm and familiar, cutting through the surreal quality of the situation. Sarah sat back on her heels, her heart pounding. How did you get my number? The question came out more sharply than she intended. You gave it to me, remember? Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said regarding not wanting repayment. I respect that truly, but I have a proposition that has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with opportunity. Sarah stood up, leaving her cleaning supplies on the floor, her legs suddenly unsteady. What kind of opportunity? Michael's voice was genuine, excited even. I've been so moved by our encounter that I've done some research of my own. I learned about your situation, your multiple jobs, your daughter Lily. I'm not offering you a handout, Sarah. I'm offering you a job. A real job with benefits, a living wage, reasonable hours that would let you actually spend time with your daughter. My company needs people with your character in our community outreach program. People who understand what it means to struggle, who have genuine empathy for others. Would you consider interviewing for the position? Sarah couldn't breathe. A job with Thornton Industries? It seemed impossible, like something from a fantasy. I don't have a college degree, she said, her voice small. I'm not qualified for corporate work. I clean offices and serve coffee and stock shelves. That's what I know how to do." Michael's laugh was gentle, not mocking. "You have something far more valuable than a degree. You have heart. You have authenticity. You understand what real people deal with because you've lived it. That's what we need. That's what I need. Skills can be taught. Character can't be. Will you at least think about it?" Sarah found herself saying yes, even though every logical part of her brain was screaming that this couldn't be real. The interview happened the following week, and Sarah had never been so nervous in her entire life. She borrowed clothes from her friend Maria because she had nothing appropriate to wear to a place like Thornton Industries. She took 2 buses and a train to get to the gleaming high-rise downtown, a building she'd passed 100 times but never imagined she'd enter. The lobby alone was intimidating, all marble and glass and important-looking people in expensive suits walking with purpose. Sarah felt completely out of place, like everyone could see she didn't belong there. But the receptionist smiled at her warmly and directed her to the 20th floor. And within minutes, she was sitting in a conference room with the head of human resources and the director of community relations. They asked her about her life, her experiences, her thoughts on what community outreach should accomplish. And Sarah, who'd been terrified she wouldn't know what to say, found herself speaking from the heart. She talked about dignity and respect, about how people don't just need money but need to be seen and valued. She talked about her own struggles, how close she'd come to homelessness, how that fear lived with her every single day. She talked about seeing people on the streets and knowing that any one of them could be her with just one twist of fate. She talked about Lily and wanting to teach her that compassion matters, that helping others isn't a transaction but a responsibility we all share. When she finished, there was silence in the room, and Sarah was sure she'd said too much, been too emotional, been too real. 2 days later, her phone rang again. They wanted to hire her. The salary was more than she made at all 3 of her current jobs combined. There were health benefits, retirement contributions, paid vacation days, sick leave, real things. Normal things that Sarah had thought were reserved for other people, not for struggling single mothers like her. She cried when she heard the news, great heaving sobs that she couldn't control, because the relief was so overwhelming it felt physical. For the first time in years she could breathe. She could provide for Lily without working herself to death. She could pay bills on time. She could buy groceries without calculating every penny. She could take Lily to the doctor without weighing whether they could afford it. She could sleep without that constant knot of anxiety in her stomach. If you're watching this right now and this story is touching your heart, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I share stories like this that remind us there's still good in the world, and leave a like if you believe in the power of kindness. Your engagement helps this channel grow and allows me to share more inspiring stories. Now let's continue, because Sarah's journey is just beginning. Sarah's first day at Thornton Industries was overwhelming in the best possible way. She had her own desk, her own computer with 2 monitors that she didn't even know how to use yet, business cards with her name on them, and colleagues who introduced themselves and welcomed her warmly. The building had a cafeteria with actually good food, coffee that was free, and a gym she could use during lunch breaks. It felt like stepping into a different universe. Michael stopped by her office personally to welcome her, and there was genuine warmth in his greeting. "How are you settling in?" he asked. Sarah smiled, still somewhat in awe of how drastically her life had changed. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream." Michael sat down across from her. "It's not a dream, Sarah. You earned this. What you did that day on the street, it wasn't just about giving me a sandwich. It was about seeing me as a human being when I was invisible to everyone else. That's the quality we desperately need in this role and in this company." Over the following weeks and months, Sarah discovered she was actually good at this job. Really good. She developed programs to help low-income families access technology resources. She created partnerships with local shelters to provide job training and placement services. She brought a perspective to the company that had been missing, a voice for the people who were usually forgotten or overlooked. Her colleagues respected her, not despite her background, but because of it. She never forgot where she came from, and that authenticity resonated with everyone she worked with. The people they served could tell she understood them because she'd been them. There was no condescension in her approach, no pity, just genuine respect and a real desire to help. Michael became more than just her boss. Over time, he became a mentor and, surprisingly, a friend. They would sometimes have coffee together and talk about life, about purpose, about the responsibility that comes with having resources. Michael told her that their encounter had changed him too, had reminded him to stay connected to the real world beyond boardrooms and quarterly reports. He'd started spending more time on initiatives that mattered rather than just chasing profits. He'd reconnected with the passion that had driven him to build his company in the first place. "You gave me more than a sandwich that day," he told her once. "You gave me back my humanity." But Sarah's transformation wasn't just about financial stability or a good job. It was about rediscovering her own worth and value. For years, she'd felt invisible, like just another struggling single mother that society had written off as a statistic. Now she had a voice, a platform, and the ability to make real change. She started a scholarship program specifically for children of single parents, using her own story to inspire others to believe that circumstances don't define your worth or limit your potential. She spoke at community centers and schools, sharing her journey and encouraging people that one act of kindness, one moment of compassion, can change everything. When Lily asked her how everything had changed so quickly, Sarah told her the truth, the whole truth. "I helped someone who needed help, baby. And it turned out he could help me too. But the real lesson isn't about what I got in return. The real lesson is that kindness matters. Compassion matters. Seeing people as human beings matters. Always. Even when it costs you something. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when you're struggling yourself. Because that's when it matters most." Lily, wise beyond her 7 years, hugged her mother tight and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." And Sarah, for the first time in a very long time, felt proud of who she was. The story of Sarah and Michael began to spread, first within Thornton Industries, then in local news, and eventually it went viral on social media. Millions of people shared it, commented on it, were moved by it. People were hungry for stories of hope, for evidence that compassion still existed, that kindness could still change lives. Some were cynical, calling it a publicity stunt, or claiming Michael had orchestrated the whole thing for good press. But those who knew the real story, who saw the genuine friendship that had developed between Sarah and Michael, understood it was completely authentic. It was a reminder in an often cold and disconnected world that human connection still matters, that seeing each other's humanity is powerful and transformative. Michael used the attention to launch a broader initiative challenging other CEOs and wealthy individuals to spend time understanding the lives of their lowest-paid workers, to step outside their privileged bubbles and see the real struggles people faced. He called it the Compassion Challenge, and it went viral. Some business leaders mocked him for it, calling it naive or impractical. But others took up the challenge. Several major companies implemented new programs to support working families, raised minimum wages, improved benefits, all inspired by Sarah's story. The ripple effect was real and measurable. What started with one woman giving her sandwich to a stranger had created waves that touched thousands of lives. But perhaps the most important part of Sarah's transformation was how she paid it forward. She never forgot what it felt like to be struggling, to be one emergency away from disaster, to lie awake at night terrified about the future. With her new stability, she started helping others in ways both small and profound. She mentored other single mothers navigating the job market. She shared her story at job training programs. She regularly volunteered at the very shelters where she'd once feared she and Lily might end up. She taught her daughter through example that privilege isn't about what you have, but about what you do with it. That success isn't measured by your bank account, but by the positive impact you have on others. Years later, Sarah would look back on that rainy Tuesday as the day her life split into before and after. Not just because of the job or the financial security, although those things mattered immensely, but because it proved something she'd always believed but sometimes doubted in her darkest moments. It proved that goodness matters, that compassion is never wasted, that treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances, is always the right choice. She'd helped a stranger because it was the right thing to do, not expecting anything in return. And that authentic generosity had opened doors she never knew existed and changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. Michael often said in interviews that their encounter saved his life in ways that went beyond physical survival. It reconnected him with his purpose, reminded him why he'd worked so hard to build his company in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the power or seeing his name on buildings. It was about having the resources to make a positive difference in the world. Sarah showed him that you didn't need billions to do that. You just needed to see people, really see them, and respond with compassion. Everything else followed from that simple truth. The friendship between Sarah and Michael became a testament to what's possible when we look beyond superficial differences and recognize our shared humanity. A billionaire CEO and a former struggling single mother, brought together by one moment of genuine kindness on a rainy street corner. They came from completely different worlds, had completely different life experiences, but they'd found common ground in the belief that people matter more than profit, that compassion is the currency that truly changes lives. Their story wasn't really about wealth or poverty. It was about the transformative power of seeing each other as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. It was about remembering that every person you pass on the street has a story, has struggles, has value that goes far beyond their appearance or circumstances. So let me ask you something important right now. When was the last time you really saw someone? Not just looked at them, but really saw them as a full human being with hopes and fears and dreams just like you. Think about it. Drop your answer in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people you encounter every day, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it because stories like this remind us of who we want to be, who we can be when we choose compassion over convenience. Sarah's story teaches us that we never know who we're helping or how that help might come back to us. But more importantly, it teaches us that's not why we help. We help because it's right. We help because we recognize ourselves in other people's struggles. We help because compassion and kindness are what make us truly human. Michael's story teaches us that no matter how successful we become, no matter how much money or power we accumulate, staying connected to our basic humanity is what matters most. That seeing people, truly seeing them beyond their circumstances, is what gives life meaning. Their story together teaches us that transformation is possible, that one moment can change everything, that kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see or imagine. It teaches us that we're all connected, that the line between having enough and not having enough is thinner than we like to believe, and that treating everyone with dignity and respect isn't just nice, it's essential. It teaches us that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely, from one human being to another, in moments of genuine connection and compassion. Before I let you go, I want to hear from you one more time. What's one thing you're going to do differently after hearing this story? How are you going to show compassion to someone this week? Comment below and let me know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that inspire you to be better, to do better, to see better. Share this video with 3 people who need to hear this message today. Because in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, we need these reminders that kindness still exists, that compassion still matters, that we're all in this together. Thank you for watching. And remember, you never know whose life you might change with one simple act of kindness. See you in the next video.